brought up some artifacts for today's guest speaker. So I'll introduce you in a minute, but I wanted to show you some of the pieces we got to pull today. We're pretty excited about our presentation today. As Amy mentioned, we haven't had a program in a really long time, so we're hoping this will give us some motivation to keep going with these programs. Please check our Facebook out. We do have a couple more planned for at least one a month through June. So check our Facebook, so you can see the events that we're going to have coming up. So the artifacts I have out here for today, we have these two model tanks here. We have a Sherman M4 Tank here. This was actually utilized at the CGSC school here as a model training aid. We also have this small German Panzer series. It's kind of a hybrid. If you come and look closely, we can point out some things about it, but it actually has components of mix of two different types of things. We're not exactly sure why. We think one of the reasons could be that they may have not captured or had intel on one of the newer models, so that's probably why they maybe have a mix of that. So we do think this is also a training model utilized at the CGSC. We also have a model 1944 inverted coat here. What's kind of cool about this particular coat is that it belonged to an individual who was stationed here at Fort Leavenworth during World War II, and he was at the reception center. That building no longer exists, and he worked in supply. So afterwards, feel free to come up and take a look at some of the artifacts. And then we also have this M1 helmet, which most people are probably pretty familiar with. I learned some pretty interesting things about this helmet. When I look at it, I was like, oh, it's just from World War II, that's it. Fun fact, we used it all the way up until 1980. I didn't know that. And Gary had some pretty fun stories to share with me about his time using it when he was in service. So afterwards, please feel free to come up and chat either about the artifacts, about the museum. I'd be happy to talk to you guys. So I'm going to introduce Gary Linhart. He's going to talk about the Battle of Kasserine Pass. Gary here is part of the Army University Press team, the documentary team, and he used to do staff rights. So this is the people you so take it away, Gary.
Thanks, Megan. You just aged me by saying that I actually wore that helmet at one point. Yikes.
They stopped making it before I was born.
Yeah. So good evening, everybody. My name is Gary Linhart. I'm from the Army University Press. Currently, I make movies for the Army, military documentaries. But at one point in my life, I used to teach military history to ROTC so that they knew how to teach history to their cadets. One of the classes I taught was how to do a battle analysis. And I actually recently taught that class. And when Megan contacted me, she says, hey, you have anything cool to show folks? I immediately thought of the battle analysis class. Now what I did with this is I took out all the kind of boring doctrinal pieces of how to conduct a battle analysis, and I just left the Kasserine Pass stuff. So hopefully that's some I dare say, if war can be entertaining, hopefully it's some entertaining stuff for you to learn tonight. Why Kasserine Pass as an example of how to analyze a battle? Well, what I did is I looked at this book right here. This is called America's First Battles. And basically what this is kind of a survey of all our first battles for each war and how well we did in each first battle of each war. And I will tell you, we were horrible. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned about, I dare say, defeats. And that's what we're going to see here today, is our first major battle in Europe in World War II, and it was subsequently basically a defeat for us. And what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to show you background of how we get to the battlefield, then I'm going to talk about the events of the battle itself, and then we'll do a little bit of analysis at the very end. So, let's get to it, shall we? Now, I know what you're thinking. I have come to the wrong museum. What presentation is this? Does anybody know what that is?
Pontiac Trans Am?
It's a Pontiac Trans Am. Does anybody know what year that is?
1980.
Very good. That is actually my first car. It is a 1979 Trans Am. Why am I showing you my first car? Well, what is it? It's February 23rd today. It is 79 years ago today that the Battle of Kasserine Pass ended. Because when I saw 79, I'm like, what the hell can I tell about? Oh, I know. I'll show my. Any chance I get to show my first car, I do it. So this is about the time where the battle is going to culminate and the Germans are going to start falling back. Now, before we get into my stuff, we get, as a little surprise, we get a little clip of Patton. In this clip, we're going to see Patton talking to General Bradley, and Patton's going to show up at 2nd Corps headquarters, which is going to be the unit that we're going to be talking about tonight. And he's going to ask, hey, what went wrong? And what he's going to say kind of mirrors what a lot of people think about this battle. So hopefully I can make this.
Happened at Kasserine. Sherman. Apparently everything went wrong. We sent over a 75mm shell across the return at 88. Their tanks are diesels. And even when we managed to hit one of them, they kept on running our tanks. The men call them Purple Heart boxes. One hot piece of shrapnel and the gasoline explodes. We warned them about the tank. You know, I talked to one of the soldiers about the half flask. I asked him if the machine gun bullets pierced the arm. And he said, no, sir. The bullets just come through one side and rattle around a bit.
So that's what Hollywood tells us. It's all about all about the equipment, right? Our technology failed us. That's usually what comes out of Kasserine. So we had bad Sherman tanks, and they were horrible. Well, let's find out. Now, I've extended my presentation a little bit because of what's been going on over in Europe right now. So I wanted to show you a little bit about things. Some things just never change. What you're looking at here is 1932 Europe, and the very next year, this gentleman, Adolf Hitler, is going to show up and turn the Weimar Republic into Nazi Germany. And he's going to start taking land, without asking, actually. And then he'll take this area right here. That is called the Sudetenland, part of Czechoslovakia. And guess what he says? He says, you know what? All of those areas right there, they have German people in there, and that should be part of Germany. And we heard this recently. Yes, we have. So he will do it. He will go ahead and take the Sudetenland. There's an agreement with the rest of the Allies, and in he will go. And then a few months later, guess what? He takes the rest of Czechoslovakia. He's going to grab up some allies and then starts a war. He will take Poland, and did you notice? He only takes half of it. The Soviet Union takes the other half of Poland. So there's a thing about Russians and taking this area of Europe that's going to repeat itself over and over throughout history. This is nothing new. He will take Denmark and Norway. He will attack France and take the majority of it. But he doesn't take all of it. A portion of it is going to stay French. It's going to become Vichy France, and that is an ally of the Germans. That's important. We're going to talk about them later. But they go over to the German side. He will take Yugoslavia, Greece, and then it's off the map, but I got a little annex here about the area of Libya and Egypt. And what's going to happen between 40 and 42 is there's going to be a series of battles going back and forth between what's known as the African Corps, which will become known as Panzer Army Africa, and the British 8th Army. And it just keeps going back and forth and back and forth. More on that later. Then the big one hits in 1941. He will invade and take that large chunk of the Soviet Union. But that's as far as he will go. That is the pinnacle of the German Empire under Adolf Hitler. Because on December 6, 1941, the Soviets are going to counterattack and stop them just in front of Moscow. Note the date, December 6, 1941. What's important about it for us, the United States, the very next day, this happens. Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, and now we're part of World War II. And this man right here, Franklin Delano, on how we conduct the war. One of his first decisions is this right here, Germany first. Because of the Japanese attack us, we have a two-front war. We have a war against Japan and a war against Germany. But we're going to side with our British allies and say, you know what, we're going to hit Germany first, and then we'll take care of Japan after that. So, what occurs after that is a series of plans. Because we're going to go to Germany first, we create Operation Bolero, and the intention for Bolero is to gather as many soldiers as we possibly can onto England to eventually conduct Operation Roundup in 1943 to return into France and attack Germany. But there's a problem, and the problem is right here. We're very concerned that the USSR is going to fall apart, and we don't want them to fall apart because that's going to free up a lot of Germans to fight us. So we're thinking if the Germany falls, we're going to attack in 1942. Enter Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of England, says, whoa, hold the phone, kids. 42, the only troops available is us. So before you sign up for us to go back into Europe in 42, hold up. We're not ready for that. And oh, by the way, we don't have enough landing craft. So Sledgehammer in 42 is canceled. But we've appeased one side, the other side is unhappy now. Because the Soviets really want us to do something. They're really getting hit hard over here on the Eastern Front. So please, for God's sake, do something. And Roosevelt is also getting pressure at home to do something in 42. So the decision is made to do this, Operation Torch, which is a return to not Europe, but Africa. And since the Vichy French are on the German side, our thought process is, well, let's attack the lesser army, and that way we can get some experience, and we're still doing something for the Allies, and we're attacking an Axis ally. So in we go to, let me turn that down just a little bit. I want to blow your ears up for what's happening next. Here we go. We'll land at 3 different spots, and that's pretty much of a success, and we'll take North Africa fairly easily. Vichy France will now fall. No more Frenchmen on the Axis side. The French now come over to our side. But remember what I said about this. This is going on over on the other side of Africa, and a battle called El Alamein just before Operation Torch occurs. Rommel, the guy that's in charge of Panzer Army Africa, will be defeated by the British 8th Army, and he's going to start running back towards Tunisia. So now there's a race on to try to cut off Rommel from his port in Tunisia. The British 1st Army is going to start heading towards Tunisia to cut him off, but the Germans are going to flood that area with Panzer Army, the 5th Panzer Army, and they will stop the British 1st Army right here, just short of the port. Here's a closer look at it, and because the Germans were successful in establishing a defense here, we will stop cold right here just before the ports. Here's how we're set up: the British 5th Corps in the north, the French 19th Corps in the second, and the U.S. 2nd Corps in the south. And because we're still moving this way, really this corps only has one division, the 1st Armored Division with it. So it's kind of thin down here. There's only 4 what's known as brigades. Back then, an armored division is called a combat command. You'll hear me talk about that a little bit. Really, the powerful ones are A, B, and C. The D one is really just a shell, so really all we have is 3 brigades in this entire 50-mile front. So not a whole lot of forces down here on the U.S. flank. The Germans are going to conduct a series of probing battles here along this line, and they're going to quickly realize that the French 19th Corps is not very good. Remember, they just came over to our side. They're not well equipped. They're not well trained. And both the Germans realize it and we realize it too. The British say, oh my God, we have a problem in the center. We need to beef it up. So they order the 2nd Corps to give up one of its brigades to bolster up the French 19th Corps, leaving the right flank even weaker. But that's okay according to the British because they're expecting the attack in the north. They do not expect an attack in the south. Enter Panzer Army Africa. They were coming all the way over from Egypt, and they will show up here in January just south of our line. This is the guy named Rommel. The 5th Panzer Army is under this guy right here, a guy named von Arnim. And Rommel will say, here's what I want to do. I want to tank the U.S. flank, because I see weakness there. What I would like you to do is take the 10th Panzer Division and 21st Panzer Division, attack the U.S. flank, then you give me the 21st Panzer Division, and I'll attack down here at Gotz. Problem. Rommel does not command von Arnim. He's asking him to do this. It's cooperation. These are two army commanders that have to cooperate. The higher command is still back in Italy, so these guys kind of have to work it out. Von Arnim doesn't really want to do this, but Rommel does, and he finally convinces him to do it. Because what Rommel thinks is, before the 8th Army comes, I can do this, and then I can turn around and attack the 8th Army. Way more, he's biting off way more than he can chew, but that's what Rommel is. He's that kind of guy, and he's going to try to pull this off. All right, so there's all the background noise on how we get to where we're getting. Now let's take a look at the terrain and the opponents and all that stuff. Who has been in the military before? Raise your hand. Does this area look familiar for the United States? Have you ever been to a place like this in the United States?
Yeah.
Where?
Yeah.
There you go. If you have been to the National Training Center, you've kind of been here. Because, I mean, look at it. It's high desert. We got mountains in the background. We got wadis all through it. And we got giant maps. NPC. So if you can understand that, you kind of understand where we're at here. Let's take another closer look at the terrain. The main obstacle to movement in this area is what's known as the Eastern Dorsal. And the Eastern Dorsal are like these mountains in the background. You can't pass through them, except for these few passes that will go through that mountain range. So if you're going from east to west or west to east, you have got to go through one of those passes. Makes movement predictable. So that's why when I showed you those 3 brigades, that's where they're sitting. They're sitting on this side of each one of those passes because they know the Germans have got to come that way. So that kind of makes sense. The pass that we're going to be concerned about is the Fade Pass right here with Combat Command A. All right, let's take a closer look at the Fade Pass. Looking in from the German side, this is what we're talking about. This is the pass. And as you can see, it's pretty constrained. If you're trying to get through this area, there's really only one way to go. That road right there. You cannot spread your forces out far. You've got to go through this channelized area right there. This is Jabal. I'm going to screw up a lot of Arabic words, forgive me. Kasserine, that is this right here on the map. And this is Garik Hadid, and that's this right here. So that's what you're looking at. You're looking at it this direction, and those are the 2 mountaintops. If you're the Germans, that's what you're seeing as you're coming in. From the American point of view, if you're sitting down here and looking north, this is Sidi Bouzid, and there it is on the map right there. Off in the distance, and we're going to talk about this later, Lasuda, this big hill right there, is that big hill right there. You'll notice the flat terrain, it's deceptive. It's just like the NTC, if you've been there, it's a rolling desert. So it looks like it's flat, but there are places to hide, and there's wadis all the way through here to also hide your tanks and hide movement. So it's not as flat as it would appear. All right, there's the terrain. Now let's kind of compare these things between the 2 sides. All right, quickly, doctrine and training. The Germans, as I've kind of showed you a little bit, have done this before. They're very experienced at conducting war, especially down here in the desert. So they are well trained, and their doctrine means how they fight, works well for them. They figured this out. The U.S., however, we're still relatively green. We're new at this. We haven't had a lot of experience. Our troops really need to figure this out. And they're utilizing a doctrine that's a little bit fluky. What we say as we're coming into this war is these tanks right here are not designed to attack other tanks. That's their secondary role. What we want these tanks to do is break through and mess up their rear area. We don't want to go up against tanks. We have something to deal with that, which is known as a tank destroyer. Talk more about that in a second. Tank destroyers are designed to defeat these tanks, so these tanks don't have to do it. This guy, General McNair, he's the one that's going to create the Army out of nothing. Certainly it is poor economy to use a $35,000 medium tank to destroy another tank when the job can be done by a gun costing a fraction as much. We're in the biggest war of our life, and this guy's worried about the price tag. But, you know, we don't borrow like we did what we do today, and that is a concern. There's a whole lot of concerns that are going into this whole tank destroyer concept. We'll talk about that here right now, in fact. So there's the tank. You heard in the movie, our tanks are crap. They blow up. They failed us on this battle. But I will tell you, this is a much maligned tank. It's not a bad. The Sherman tank was given to the British at El Alamein, and they used it to great success. It proved itself on the desert with the British. But we use it and we find that there's a problem with it. Well, not so fast. The tank destroyers that are designed to help us out in World War II is primarily the M10 and the M18. They look like a tank, I know, but they're not. They're lighter than the regular tanks. Notice that they don't even have a turret top to them to save weight. They have a bigger gun. They're faster. They're designed to go in, kill the enemy tanks, and get the hell out. But at the time of Sidi, we don't have these yet. They're still being developed and produced, so we have to have an interim vehicle. That doesn't look as cool, but it's light. It's got a 75 millimeter on it. It's fast. It can do, theoretically, what we're going to utilize our regular tank destroyers to do. But that's what we have in this battle. So there's our two primary weapon systems. On the other side is that. The Panzer III. We don't have that listed here. But take a look at the stats on both of them. Which one, if you get to choose, which one do you want?
Panzer III.
Oh, really? Just by these numbers? 50, 50, 20. You want the Sherman. The Sherman is the far superior tank to the Panzer III. The British are going to prove that over and over again. It's got better armor, it's got a better gun, it's got better movement, everything. And the majority of the German tanks at Kasserine Pass are, guess what? The Panzer III with a 50 millimeter gun. Remember what he said? We throw a 75 at them, they throw an 88 back at us. Not so fast. Now they're smart people, they're wacky Germans, and they will be improving their tanks just as like we're going to try to improve ours. And at this battle, this thing is going to show up. This has got a larger gun, 75 millimeter, but it's got lighter armor. Between the Sherman and the Panzer IV, about the same. Better gun on one side, better armor on the other. They kind of even each other out. But if you've watched Fury or Private Ryan, you're going to know about this thing right here. And a lot of tankers that are running around in Shermans will say, oh my God, those Tigers are killing us. And this is why. I mean, look at this behemoth. But you're saying to yourself, wait, the Sherman's way bigger than the Tiger. Oh no, they're not to scale. It's more like this. So this is far greater armor, far more powerful gun. But the downside of the Tiger is it's not reliable. It is mechanically breaking down every 5 to 10 miles. If it gets to the battlefield, it's very fearsome, but it just has a really difficult time keeping them running. During the war, we're going to capture Panzer IVs, Panzer Vs, Panzer VIs, and we're actually going to shoot at our own tanks and shoot back at them to see how well they do. And here are the results during the war that we came up with. You'll notice flank shots, front shots, rear shots. We are on par with the Panzer IV, which is the most numerical German tank throughout the war. They'll produce more than these than anything else. But here's why the Tiger gets such a bad rep, at least from our side. You can go right up to it and fire right into it this close, and you're not going to penetrate the front of a Tiger. How stupid do you feel being in this tank right here when you can't even hit the front end? So what you have to do is find the side of it or the rear of it and get in really close, and they still have a long range away from you. So that's why this 88 gun that's on the Tiger, and the Tiger itself, gets this mystique of being a Sherman killer. But the Germans will only produce 1,300 of them. We will produce 50,000 Sherman tanks. Not only for us, for the British and the Russians too, but how do you factor this? You're going to get around it at some point. So our mechanically reliable tank is not a bad tank to have when you have to go across an entire ocean and keep those things running and overwhelm the Germans, which is exactly what they do. All right, now that we've talked about the technology, let's talk about the composition of the units themselves. I told you earlier that this brigade is known as Combat Command A. And what that is it's a headquarters element that you can pick and choose units and put them into these brigade units, these headquarters. What I'm going to show you next is a little convoluted. Why? Why is the visual convoluted? Because what the Americans do with their stuff is convoluted. It's a little bit odd, and you'll see the comparison here in a second. What they decide to do is give Combat Command A one infantry regiment, a battalion down here at Kasserine, a battalion up here at Lasuda, and then the headquarters of the two companies, which is almost the 3rd Battalion down here at Goret Hadid. So they kind of spread their battalions out. They will put it's called attach. They will attach a company of Shermans, some tank destroyers, and artillery to this battalion in the north. There's a reason for that. I'll tell you later. In the reserve is an entire battalion minus. The minus means some of the tanks have been taken away from it, and the reason why this is minus is because 10 tanks are up here at Lasuda, but the rest of the Shermans in this reserve are together in this battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Hightower. They will have 2 artillery battalions, one self-propelled, one towed. Self-propelled means the gun is actually on the tank and can move around quicker. And then there's a division reserve. I will warn you that that looks like a pretty good reserve. It's not. And the reason is this battalion is loaded with light tanks. I showed you these cool Sherman tanks. These have M3 Stuarts. I'm not showing you those because they're outmoded, they're outdated. By this point, they shouldn't be in the war anymore, at least not in the role that they gave. So even though it's shown up here, it's really kind of useless. So that reserve is less than it looks like. This is all the stuff that's going to show up on 14 February. The next day of the battle, Combat Command C is going to show up with all of this stuff. Mech unit, battalion, 2 artillery companies, a company of tanks, company of tank destroyers, and they realize, oh my God, well we need some Shermans, so Combat Command C doesn't have any, so they turn to Combat Command B that had been given to the French, took a battalion away from them, and the night before they go into battle, they will attach 50 more Shermans to that unit. Keep that in mind, that'll become important later. So that's the U.S. side. Let's take a look at the German side. This is 1st Armored Division. They're going to go up against the 10th Panzer Division, 21st Panzer Division, 2 brigades in the north, 2 brigades in the south, and I told you before, their doctrine is really good. They're working together as a team. These tanks and infantry and artillery and their aviation are all working for one single purpose. You're not getting that over here, but these guys have learned how to use their tanks to a point that they can focus in on one particular thing and fight. We haven't figured that out, but we're about to. Okay, leadership. Let's compare the two. I mentioned before that the Germans are controlled by the Italians, which are not in country at this point, not in Tunisia. They're up in Italy, and they're falling under Commando Supremo. I just like saying that. I put that up there because I want to say it sounds like you're ordering at an Olive Garden. So Commando Supremo is in charge of the German troops, but they're not there. So these two guys are going to have to rely on cooperation. And they, by the way, do not like each other at all. So he really doesn't want to cooperate with Rommel, but Rommel's been there forever, so he kind of knows what he's doing, and he's going to ask for assistance, and initially, Arnhem is going to give it to him. Now, if it's a strained relationship on the German side, it's dysfunctional on the U.S. side. And the reason it's dysfunctional is about this guy right here. The Student Corps Commander, Major General Friedendahl. This guy will rarely leave his command headquarters. He doesn't go out to visit his troops. He will be in his command post, which is 60 to 7 miles from the front. They built this giant tunnel that's actually a little bit embarrassing because British troops are going to show up and go, "What are you scared about, Betty? You're 60 miles from the front." But he puts a lot of effort into making this well-protected command post, and will be guarded by an entire Ranger company. Not the norm. He will make very vague orders, verbal orders to his commanders. Check this out. I told you about the French unit, the unit that goes to France, goes to the French soldiers, the 19th Corps. This is the actual order that he tells them to go to the north, to be under the French. Move your command, the walking boys, pop guns, Baker's outfit, and the big fellow to M, which is due north of where you are now, as soon as possible. Have your boss report to a French gentleman whose name begins with a J, at a place which begins with D, which is 5 grid squares to the left of M. Is everybody squared away on where to go next? You got it? Yeah, the receiver of this message didn't know what he was talking about either. And he's doing this because he thinks he's fooling the enemy. He thinks his wires are tapped, if you will, and he thinks the enemy is listening. So he's trying to encrypt his own messages. Well, he does this a lot, and everybody's just more confused on this side. I guess if you don't know what you're doing, they don't know what you're doing. But so that's kind of a problem for Friedendahl. When he writes his orders, they're really, really directive. Because this is the Corps order, and for those of you that have never seen a Corps order, they're very general in nature. They let the divisions and the brigades figure out what they're going to do on the ground. That's not what's happening here. He looks at a map and says, okay, those 2 hills are your key terrain. I'm not going to let you decide it, I'll decide it for you. He will say, I want you to put an infantry battalion at Kasserine, and I want you to put an infantry battalion and a battery of artillery and a company of tanks at Lasuda. That's unheard of. That's what a brigade figures out. Not the Corps, not even the division tells you what to do. But he does. And it gets worse because it's not based on his personal recon. He doesn't go down and say, oh, this is where everything should go. He looks at one of those big maps and says, yeah, this is it. I want you to do this. And their hands are tied at this point. They've got to do what he's telling them to do. He will often bypass the division commander because he doesn't like him. And Ward doesn't like Friedendahl either. So they're not tied. I told you it's dysfunctional. So he will talk directly to the brigades without ever telling the division what he's doing with them. And then finally, he disregards subordinates. People are going to go back to Friedendahl and say, sir, we can't do it this way. And he will turn to them and say, no, I know better than you. We're doing it this way, period. So he doesn't listen to any of his subordinates as he's making all these weird, vague plans. There's their mission for both sides. Basically, one side is defending, the other side is attacking. They're going to attack through, and then after that, it's kind of up in the air as to what they're going to do next. But that's the deal. One's on the defense, one's on the attack. All right, let me show you what the disposition is. In the south, we have 2 passes, the Fade Pass and the Mazila Pass. Unfortunately, there's not enough forces to go around, so all they can do on the southern pass is put a reconnaissance element out to maybe observe if they come that way, but they can't cover it with actual combat forces. They're going to have to orient themselves on just the Fade Pass. And if they come to the south, they're just going to have to move and reorient themselves. So as per the Corps order, 1 battalion here in the south, another battalion here in the north. They didn't have a choice. They had to do it. Even though they were on the ground and went, I don't get it, but okay. And notice, there's a tank company and there's the artillery battery that the Corps told them to do. To the south, they do have an internal anti-tank unit, but just a small company of very small 37mm guns, little towed guns, so it's not a real deterrent to a lot of these panzers. To the southeast of Sidi are those two artillery battalions, and to the southwest is that reserve tank battalion. This is the true force of the area. And then way back, 40 miles back, is a division reserve, but again, I told you, those are light tanks, and they almost just don't count. So they almost do not have a division reserve. The orientation, and I'm being very generous to them as to their range. This is what the northern battalion is looking at and can cover. This is what the southern battalion is looking at. They're actually oriented south, not north, towards the Fade Pass. So then you say to yourself, well, how do you cover the Fade Pass if that's what we're defending? Well, their hands are tied. They've got to put these two battalions here. So there are 10 miles in between those two battalions. They can't help each other out. So what they decide to do is they take this tank company, and during the day, they're going to spread those 17 tanks over that 10-mile area, and they're going to be like little outposts to watch over the Fade Pass. And then at night, they can't see it, so they go back to Lasuda, and they send infantry patrols out to fill that 10-mile gap. Again, Corps Commander told us that's what we're going to do. So if the enemy attacks this way, the thought is we'll identify that they're coming this way, we'll fire artillery at them to slow them down, and allow Colonel Hightower and his tanks to maneuver in and stop them. That's their plan. If they come from the south, the idea is, okay, turn the artillery around, slow them down this way, and the reserve just goes this way instead of that way. During the order process, during the setup of the defense, subordinates twice will go to the brigade commander and say, what if they come at the same time on both sides? And twice, he will tell them, don't worry, that could never possibly happen. Just do the plan. That can't happen. Well, let's see what can happen. Here's the German plan. The 10th Panzer Division is going to go through the Fade Pass led by this tank brigade. They're going to go north of Lasuda and around to the north of Sidi. This brigade is going to go right through the center and head straight to Sidi. This brigade is going to go south and directly to the southeast of Sidi, and this final tank brigade is going to go along and come into the rear. Their idea is that they're all going to show up at the same time, surround the Americans that they've identified in the center of this area, and attack them in all directions simultaneously. So, that whole thing about can't happen 2 at a time, yeah, well, how about 4 at a time? All right, so now you have the plans and everything that leads up to this. Let's talk about the actual action, shall we? All right, the sun comes up, and these two brigades are going to blow right through the enemy, the U.S. reconnaissance. This is at sunup, so around 6 in the morning. The message that these guys are even here won't arrive at headquarters until about 9. So these guys down here are just running for their lives, and will not get the word back into to the headquarters that these guys are even here until 9 o'clock, about the time that they're actually showing up on the battle. Gerhardt and Ryman will blow right through the Fade Pass. As they're coming and making their move towards Lasuda, that tank company is coming out to go identify, to go take its spots on the screen line that they're going to establish. But instead of establishing positions, they run into these German tanks that they had no idea were there. 17 tanks against about 100, you do the math, they're wiped out pretty quickly. And unfortunately, the first tank to be destroyed is the company commander's tank. That's the one with the radio that's talking back to this area. So they never get the word back that all of these tanks are there through the Fade Pass. Colonel Hightower is told to start getting his battalion ready to move out. Gerhardt moves to the north. Hightower is told the words, I want you to go up and clear up the situation. They don't tell him what's out there, they just said, you need to go and clear up the situation. 40 tanks against, once again, about 100 German tanks. Not a good ratio. But he stops and fights them off as best he can. But Gerhardt's going to turn the corner, find all this artillery, and destroy it. Stukas, German dive bombers, will come in, identify the U.S. artillery, and pretty much destroy an entire battalion of U.S. artillery, taking them out of the fight. Schutte and Stankopf will make the move up, and Hightower is realizing he's in trouble. He starts falling back, but then he runs into this armored brigade. So he stops and starts fighting with them. The reserve will come up under Lieutenant Colonel Kern, thus the name Kern's Crossing. He will stop the Kern's Crossing, look at what's in front of him, and go, I think we've gone far enough. So he'll stop right there. Stankopf will come into the rear, attack Colonel Hightower's battalion to the rear. So now Hightower's fighting two battles simultaneously in two different directions. And eventually you realize, the game's afoot, I got to get out of here. And from the original 50 tanks, he will leave with 7. All right, that was 14 February. Let's look at 15 February. The U.S. realizes, oh my God, I've just lost an entire combat command. But look at what my infantry is. They're stranded. They're out there on these hills, no vehicles to get them out of there, and they're pretty much surrounded by Germans. We need to get them out of there. So let's send in Combat Command Charlie. So in they go. Colonel Stack, the commander of this entire unit, will get on top of this hill and make the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Alger. Remember, that's the battalion that got attached to them the night before. He'll say, Colonel Alger, you're in charge of the whole thing. Good luck. So not only is he in charge of the battalion, he's in charge of all this other stuff behind it as well. And forward he goes. Guess what he's told to do? Go forward and clear up the situation. Because we don't know what's going on. You go clear it up. So in he goes with his 50 tanks. Correction, 60. He's got this company behind it too. The Germans will stop them with anti-tank fire. The Americans will try to engage that anti-tank fire. And while they're doing this, 2 brigades of German armor are going to come up on the flanks and pretty much destroy Lieutenant Colonel Alger's battalion. One company will try, the reserve company tries to get around them, but to no effect. We're not really sure exactly what happens to them, but we don't hear from them again. But basically that battalion is gone. They will have only 4 tanks left after this day is over. And there's thoughts that those 4 tanks were actually maintenance down and didn't even make the battle. So an entire battalion is destroyed. That night, this infantry battalion will try to exfiltrate through the German lines. They start with about 600 soldiers. Only about 200 will make it back to U.S. lines. These guys are in a lot more trouble because they have to walk through all of these German forces. The sun will come up and they'll realize, oh my God, we're right in the middle of all the German lager sites. And 1,400 soldiers raise their hands and surrender to the Germans. So let's count them up, shall we? 2 whole battalions gone. 2 companies of tank destroyers gone. For the most part, an infantry regiment gone. An artillery battalion gone. German losses, goose egg, nothing. Here's what happens after that. This is what you just saw right there. This is the beginning parts of Kasserine Pass. But I already told you there's not a lot of troops down here. The Germans are now sitting in open area, and the British and Americans are scrambling to push soldiers down to try to stop them. So the Germans are going to go right through Kasserine Pass. You can't see the date probably, but that's 22 February. So this is as far as they'll go. According to our records, we throw a lot of artillery at them. It makes it appear that the artillery shows up and will stop the Germans in these passes, and they turn around and go. There's a certain amount of truth to that, but what really happens is von Arnim, who doesn't want to do this in the first place, says, you know what, I think I've had it with this. I'm taking my Tigers back, and I don't want to play your game anymore. And he withdraws a whole division worth of forces. Rommel is now without a 2nd division, and he has to stop. So he pulls back at that point. But we were in a lot of trouble at this point. Luckily, the Germans kind of run out of gas. So now that we've seen the setup, we've seen the events that happened, let's figure out why it happened the way it did. First of all, it's leadership. Let's talk about battlefield map. We have very directive orders. The Corps commander told you exactly what you're going to do, but you have to add to that that he didn't actually look at the terrain. Subtract that he's going to listen to anybody about what's going on, and we have the conditions for failure. We have 2 areas that he identifies as key terrain, and he dictates that we have to put 2 infantry battalions there. That forces the U.S. forces there to just put 1 company here to watch the Fade Pass and utilize a battalion to conduct a counterattack in this open area, not in the Fade Pass, but in the open area. So really, I'm going to do a little bit of armchair quarterbacking here, but it's going to make a point. If I actually went to the terrain and realized and took a look at the area, I would say, boy, these are not the key terrain here. What do you suppose is the key terrain? It's the pass. It's the pass itself, because it forces the Germans to go single file through that area. You could theoretically put infantry on the flanks to make sure that nobody can see into the area on your side. You can establish your 2 companies to overwatch the Fade Pass and maybe a 3rd company either online or as your reserve in the rear. That's concentrating all your firepower in the one spot that they have to come through. You could add your artillery to that, and oh, by the way, you could even put obstacles. Eisenhower was there the day before, and he said, hey guys, what'd you do with your mines and your wire and your obstacles? And they looked at each other and said, well, we haven't done anything, sir. Well, you probably should do that. They hadn't done any of that prior to, because they didn't really know where to put it. So that might have been a good place to put it. Now, that doesn't deal with the 2nd Division, but theoretically you could almost destroy that division, turn around and handle the other. To put it in a different way, to look at the actual numbers that are coming through, what the Americans actually do is send 1 company against all of this in the open area. And oh, by the way, they get surprised by them. Well, I mean, just looking, even though these are inferior tanks, just looking at that, you're going to lose. And they do. They lose an entire company just that quickly. And then they sent another battalion minus against this, but oh, by then, all of this has shown up, and a whole nother set is going to show up shortly thereafter of all of this times 2 to the south against just this. And they're going to lose all of that just that quickly. Had you put all of this just against this, and oh, by the way, these are inferior tanks, and if you put them in single file, well, you kind of can figure out that might be a better way to operate. So that's failure on 14 February. Let's look at 15 February. What you're looking at here is the actual diagram of the AR that's done after the battle is over. They will send officers out and identify exactly where every tank was, which way they were facing, and what they died to figure out what went wrong in this battle. If you recall, in the movie, Bradley said, oh, we sent a 75 at them, they sent an 88 back. Well, let's look. I recreated that diagram. Any tankers here, or infantrymen, Look the way they're facing. These guys are facing this way, these guys are facing this way. Looks like Custer's last stand here. They're not oriented one particular direction. They were surrounded and they didn't know where to go. They initially were stopped by anti-tank fire and fixed right here. Then the Germans are going to show up on their flanks and hit them on their sides, not on the frontal armor where the armor is the greatest. They're hitting them from every single direction on their sides. Half of them are destroyed by 50 millimeter guns. The other half are destroyed by 75 millimeter guns. There were no frontal hits causing any tank casualties. All penetrations seem to be by tank guns, and only one penetration by a long-range 88 right here. This is not a technology problem. This is a leadership problem. This is an intelligence problem. This is a doctrine problem. All of that stuff goes into why we lose all of the stuff we lost. It's not because of our tanks. Okay. I think I did it. Yeah. Right, almost right on time. A little bit, 2 minutes over. So, with all, I know I threw a lot of stuff out at you, but I will now open the floor to questions.
Well, earlier, the reason why I choose the Panzer III over the Sherman at that time, the German armored soldier was a way lot better than
Okay, true, absolutely, but I was talking purely
Yes,
tank
yes.
versus tank,
Tank
technology
versus
versus
tank.
technology.
When you talk about
But their use of it is far greater, as we just saw, than our use of our Shermans.
Yeah.
So how you use them matters just as much as what you got.
But that was my
under your
rationale.
Sherman. Absolutely, got it. Other questions? Okay.
It just is hard as an American commander to come up on that and not to use your economy of force in a certain place at a certain time. That was not done here at all. It was piecemeal.
Well, and we learned a lot from this battle. I mean, as you saw, they tore this battle apart, and they really took a lot of effort to figure out where we've gone wrong. Our doctrine is going to change. How we deploy our tanks are going to change. We go to a much more combined arms thought. Here we have tanks going up with themselves without a lot of infantry support, and it's all piecemealed in. We realize, oh my God, we got to do what the Germans did. We got to have these all together. Our artillery, our infantry, our tanks, our engineers, they all have to work together instead of piecemealing it left and right. So that's the huge lesson that comes out of Kasserine Pass. And we learn from it and we change to do better against the Germans and the rest of the world.
Was there any fallout
Sir.
on the leadership?
What's that?
Was there any fallout on?
Oh, Freedom Doll is fired. Freedom Doll is, George Patton is brought in, even though Patton was a higher commander, he is brought down to the corps level to take over the Second Corps and whip it back into shape. Because morale obviously falls tremendously from this battle. And the Americans are dumbfounded as to what's just happened to them. So Patton is brought in to kind of slap some people around, so to speak. And whip them into shape. You got that. So yeah, Freedom Doll is sent back to the States. I dare say in disgrace a little bit, but the good news is, I mean, he's the wrong person at the wrong time here, but he goes back and he's a really good cheerleader. He takes over training command, and he does quite well in the rear, training other soldiers up. So he's a really great trainer. He just doesn't know how to fight a battle. So yeah, there's a repercussion
The
there.
problem of,
What's that, sir?
mobilize 104 divisions. And that was quite a hard task. to do.
Right, I'm nothing. I mean, we're not only having to train the soldiers, but we're going to train the trainers how to train the soldiers. So there's a lot going from a tiny army to a 1 million man army. I have another question back here. Yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about the tank destroyers? Could they traverse their guns, or do they have to reposition the whole vehicle?
The ones on this battle, they could not. They had a little bit of a traverse left and right, but for the most part, you got to point that vehicle towards where you want to shoot it at. So just for this battle. Now, the follow-on tank destroyers, absolutely, the turret turns back and forth. But the whole concept behind the tank destroyer is flawed. They realize you use their tank destroyers as regular tanks. So the whole doctrine is found to be flawed. I actually have in the bigger class that I teach to my students, I go into a big doctrine spiel and show just how flawed it is. Because they take the tank destroyers in, and they're supposed to scoot in and run and fire and get the hell out. Well, they don't do that in this battle. They just go right up with the tanks, and everybody just sits there and they knock them out.
Well, the problem was that the lack of communication skills, so they didn't have teams going out and so they're identifying targets.
That's the key right there. They talk in the tank destroyer theory. The idea is we've identified exactly where the enemy is, and we'll go in and take advantage of where he's at and shoot him and kill him and get out. At any point did we know where they were at? No. We kept telling our guys, you need to go figure this out and go clear up the situation. That's not a way to fight a war. And again, another great lesson that we learned. Sir?
You know what happened to the American prisoners? Did they go back to the port and transfer back to Germany? Or would
Wow,
they
I
freeze
don't,
it?
that's a great question. I have no idea what happens to them.
That would burden the German
What-
to have to capture the
One of them, oh my gosh, I don't know, I'm not sure if it's this early. One of them's, I think one of them's, you know, at the very, everybody knows the story that at the very end of the war, Patton goes to get his nephew or something.
Yeah.
I think it's around this time frame that he's.
His son-in-law.
Son-in-law? I think around this time he's taken. I'm not sure if it's this battle, but around this time
In
frame.
Germany.
And he gets pulled all the way back to Germany to a POW camp. So I'm assuming, yeah, they're probably all sent across in troop ships back to Germany. Other questions? Sir?
There seems to be a lack of scouts out there. You know, no eyes for the commanders.
Right. It's horrible. And I can't tell you why. I mean, they have the entire recon group to the south, but internally, they don't seem to have any kind of lookouts or anything on the ridge lines to watch the paths. And I can't explain that to you. That's just a flaw in our intel, or in the way we operate. And that's one of the lessons we learned, that, oh my God, we need recon. Interestingly enough, I told you about those M3 Stewarts that were all together in a battalion. What we will do is realize, well, they're not good as main battle tanks, but they're really good scouts. So we take all of those light tanks and we give them as scouts out in front. So that's a big change with the way we operate that way.
Was there no,
Young man, what did you have?
How unlucky do you think they were?
How what?
How unlucky do you think they
Unlucky? We were full of unluck. we were about you just saw about the unluckiest unit in America, right there. Yeah, none at all, sir.
my question was with the signal, like, did they not, hear signal, intelligence or traffic, that like, hey, something big is coming up this way, or the guys were calling in, German air?
Well, I mentioned earlier that the lead tank, that they only had one tank that had a radio to talk to higher. That got killed right off the bat. I'm not sure why the scout unit down south didn't report back until 9. I don't know why it took them 2 hours. I'm assuming they're just running around for their dear life.
They wouldn't
Didn't
have
have time to call. And so
They didn't have learners.
they did have communications, they just didn't utilize it correctly, or were not able to. Other questions?
Did the Germans have radios in their tanks?
Oh, yes, every single one. Internally, we actually have very good radios. Internally, all of our tanks are talking to each other. But the communication higher, I'm not sure why it's so bad, but it's horrible in this battle. But the Germans are doing very well on being able to talk. And you just mentioned earlier, they're talking to their aircraft. We don't figure that out until later in the war. Now, we do it much better. As we progress, we actually improve over the Germans. We're doing better than the Germans by the end of the war in talking to our aircraft.
We had scout aircraft that went up and just seeked out the enemy.
Any other questions? Okay, if anybody ever finds a 1979 Trans Am, let me know, because I'm ready to buy one. Thank you very much, appreciate it.